What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today we're doing something pretty crazy. Here's 15 decks for Guilds of Ravnica Standard. Now, this is both in the interest of time. Got a lot of decks to talk about. Don't want to be here all night or anything, but also I don't want to literally show my cards too early before we really get going in this format. But rest assured, most or even all of the decks I talk about today will be fully teched at some point over the season, but that's where you come in. Hello, Ziggy. This is also where you come in. But anyway, that's where you come in. If any of these lists in particular, or these ideas pique your interest, you can hop on over to the Patreon, link in the description, become a $1 member, just a $1 member, and you can vote on which decks among these that you'd like to see first. So you can affect YouTube history. It's actually a huge time right now. A lot of people are trying to figure out what they want to play after rotation. This is one of the most anticipated standard rotations of all time. If you want to, go on over to Patreon, become a $1 member, and you can vote on what decks you want to see first this deck tech season. But that's enough jib-jabbering and all that. Let's go ahead and talk about these decks. Now, the first deck I want to bring up today is the deck that a lot of people have picked as the deck to beat in week 0, starting off standard. This is the deck a lot of people are afraid of. GOLGARI STOMPY is that deck. Green-black really didn't lose that much to rotation, and it picked up a whole bunch of pieces. We got Pelt Collector to help cover that 1-drop slot, make up for those games where we don't get Lana War Elves on turn 1. Pelt Collector is amazing. Plus, we got Nullhide Ferox for that deck, which is great. Obviously, so many stats for so little mana. Pseudo Hexproof, which is great. Taxes those cast downs and Assassin's Trophies and stuff. And speaking of Assassin's Trophy, it's just about the only reason to splash black in the deck. But we really, really want to play the card. We want to have access to that. And we've got so many incidental green-black dual lands that it's really not hard to pull it off and still cast Steel League Champion as early as turn 2. Let's go in the opposite direction for the second deck I want to talk about, because this is a control deck. A lot of people have JESKAI picked as maybe the best pure control deck in the format after rotation. There is a little bit of a fight when it comes to this, but most people are trying to figure out the best way to play Teferi in this next format. Teferi is probably one of the best, if not the single best card in terms of raw power once we hit rotation. So a lot of people are trying to figure out the best way to not break him necessarily, but just what's the best shell that holds this card. And the mana is so good in JESKAI that this might be the answer. As a matter of fact, I should pause here briefly to talk about why JESKAI is such a good color combination, along with ABZAN, SULTAI, GRIXIS, and NAYA. All of these have 2 different shock lands and a bunch of different check lands, like 3 check land per 3 color combination. Like, so for JESKAI, for instance, we get Steam Vents and Sulphur Falls. We get Clifftop Retreat, and we get Sacred Foundry. Plus, we get Glacial Fortress for blue-white. Like, there's just no end to the dual lands this deck gets to play. The problem, however, is that most of our dual lands, if you didn't notice, are red. We have like 16 dual lands that produce red mana in this deck, which just means we probably don't have to play too many mountains, obviously, but it also means that it's going to be a little tough to engineer the mana base in such a way that we can get like double blue on turn 3 for Sinister Sabotage, for instance. It's going to be really easy to cast cards like Deafening Clarion, but when it comes to getting blue mana, it looks a little bit tougher, so that's the only shaky thing about the JESKAI mana base. But it looks pretty easy to make this deck right now, and it could be the single best Teferi shell in the format, which means it's probably got a shot at seeing a lot of play. But there's also, considering we have so many red dual lands, a shot at JESKAI mid-range. This is an interesting little theory crafting that I've been doing lately. At least it's interesting to me. But I'll pass it along to you, That deck has the mana base to play Rekindling Phoenix and possibly even Goblin Chain Whirler, like all these ridiculous red cards. Obviously, Legion War Boss it could play if it wanted to. But it could also play Teferi at the 5-drop slot. We just got the mana to be able to do that. So if it's good, I think people will try it, because we just get to play like all of the best red creatures, which are still incidentally some of the best creatures in the format. But we also get the best 5-drop in standard, which is definitely Teferi. So it's at least worth an idea. But while we're talking about blue-red based control decks, why not just drop the white and just play blue-red control in the form of COUNTERBURN, a deck that I think actually has a real shot in the format. It gets both Ionize and even Risk Factor, but it also has, Shock, Lightning Strike, and all that. We can play, I always want to call it Blaze. Banefire. We could play Banefire if we wanted to, plus just counter spells, Syncopate, Essence Scatter, Sinister Sabotage if we wanted another 3-mana counter spell. There's tons of them, Disdainful Stroke, whatever. So actually Blue-Red Counterburn looks like it might be a decent deck. It can play at almost 100% instant speed, other than maybe cards like Search for His Kanto or maybe even Rowlers at Viceroy, which looks like a really good finisher for that deck. So I actually have a lot of faith in Counterburn this time around. I definitely am stoked to play this deck. Let's switch directions again and talk about Boros aggro, because this looks like the default, like best, quote-unquote best, from what we can tell, aggro deck in the format right now. You know, Tajik and Aurelia really make red-white worth giving a look. Plus we've got, you know, cards like Path of Metal and even Relentless Raptor at the 2-drop slot, because the 2-drop slot looks a little bit thin, let me just be honest with you. You know, so we've got that. I guess we got Boros Challenger too out of this set, plus a bunch of decent 1-drops, you know. So I think this deck could actually be very, very real, but it's all in figuring out how many 4-drops you actually play, because I think you do want to play Aurelia, but is it 2 copies or 3 copies? How many 3-drops do you play? Exactly where on the curve is that deck going to settle? I think is the real problem here. You know, just how fast is that deck really? If the deck is fast enough, then I think it has the chance of being the best aggro deck in Standard. But if it's not fast enough, I think it has a chance at getting replaced by the first budget deck that I want to talk about, and that's the Flame of Keld, just the mono red Flame of Keld deck, which when you really analyze things, didn't actually lose that much. You know, it lost Bomat Courier, it lost Soulscar Mage, which really does suck to lose, but that deck could play Risk Factor if it wanted to. But I'm more excited about playing Runaway Steamkin and Flame of Keld, as well as Arclight Phoenix. And yeah, I think Arclight Phoenix, we're going to have harped on this card enough, but we have Maximized Velocity in this format, which is 2 spells for 2 mana on any given turn, you know. Just target to get to Lava Runner or something with it. So I actually think that this deck still has legs and might be the single fastest deck in Standard, which is always pretty, you know, valuable in the very early running. Now, while we're on budget decks, I know that there's a lot of budget-hungry folk out there, you know. I'm one of them, as a matter of fact. But one of the budget decks that I'm most excited about putting together and playing is Turbo SURVEIL. You know, we have so many different SURVEIL enablers, some of which are really, really good in Standard right now. And we have 2 really good budget payoffs in Thoughtbound Phantasm and Dimir Spybug, which actually look like they could end a ton of games. A ton of games. And again, the SURVEIL cards you have to play to actually get the payoff for these SURVEIL guys right here are all actually decent. You know, you get Thought Erasure and a bunch of other really good stuff. So this actually looks like maybe the best pure budget deck of the season, and I definitely want to put this thing together. It looks like an awesome deck. But speaking of bugs, let's talk about Bug, or Sultai, as people call it, blue, black, and green. Because there's a lot you can do with this deck right now in Standard. There's a Sultai control deck that operates mostly at instant speed, plays Surge for his Kanta, but I think there are better color combinations if that's what you're trying to do with your control deck. But there's a great Sultai mid-range deck right now that is kind of an undergrowth deck. You know, plays a fair amount of creatures, Stitcher Supplier perhaps, maybe even Glowspore Shaman, that's new. And its top end consists of things like Muldrotha, which will allow it to do all kinds of crazy stuff in the very, very late game. And I actually have some faith in that deck. I think the Muldrotha deck looks really decent right now. You get Underrealm Lich in that deck, which looks like a ridiculous piece. You know? And you probably get to play a toolbox kind of strategy where you only have to play 1 or 2 copies of a bunch of cards, because you can play Mausoleum Secrets in that deck to probably great effect. So I actually think Sultai midrange might be the thing, but I've got another idea. This is some more theory crafting here. But I think Sultai White might actually be a real deck, you know. Or really, more accurately, like Esper Green. You know, Esper that adds green. Just basically a blue-black control. I'll even simplify it more. Blue-black control deck that splashes white so it can play Teferi, and splashes green so it can play Assassin's Trophy. I think that could be a really, really good control deck, and if the mana's right for it, which is entirely possible, if it's only white card is Teferi, if it's only green card is Assassin's Trophy, I think that the mana is actually very much possible for that deck, and it could be a great control deck. So that's another idea that I've got here, just throwing that out there. This is actually going to end up being more than 15 decks by the end of the video, but that's just more value. But I actually haven't talked about like any tribal decks at all in this video, so I should probably bring up at least a couple of them. It's kind of sad that we're not going to be playing too many of these Ixalan tribes, but I think if we're going to play any of them, Dinosaurs actually looks okay. Like what I'm envisioning is a Naya Dinosaurs deck, perhaps. Maybe even just green-white, but it may be also Naya Dinosaurs deck. That basically just tries to ramp. You know, we just got the new Explosive Vegetation, which looks pretty decent. We still got Gifted Paradise. We've got Thunderherd Migration, obviously, which if you have Dinosaurs is like the best ramp piece in the format. So I'm thinking that all of that, and you finish off the game with Awakening Sun's Avatar. That actually does not look like a terrible strategy in a Standard that might slow down a step and could actually fit a strategy like this. I want to try it out. But while we're talking about tribal stuff, let's devote some attention to Knights for a second. So I think this tribe actually has a shot in the next format, specifically ABZAN Knights, even though the only black cards are probably Knight of Malice and Assassin's Trophy, but we want to play those cards. But this deck abuses History of Benalia really, really well, and it too looks like one of the better cards in the whole format after rotation. So if you want to play History, this is probably the way to do it. We got a bunch of good green-white Knights, surprisingly, but we got Knight of Autumn, which is like one of the best cards in the whole set. It does whatever you want, basically. It's a genie. Might not be the creature type, but it grants you one of 3 wishes when it enters the battlefield. And it just looks so good and flexible, and I want to play it. But we also got Conclave Cavalier, which might be in the deck. It's a knight. It creates knights. It's really good on the 3rd chapter of history. So I think this deck is actually shaping up to look really, really good. I guess I have a couple more tribal decks on the list. So I'll just go through them here. I want to talk about goblins. Maybe, it looks like goblins look at least okay. They're probably the best shell for a goblin chain whirler right now. Just a mono red deck, basically, is going to be the easiest way to play Chain Whirler. So other than Flame of Keld, this might be the best way to play Mr. Chains right now. So, but we also, we got a bunch of good stuff. We got Crater Maker in this new set. We've always, we've had Siege Gang for a little while now, and he's a great way to finish off in that Goblins deck. So Goblins might be one of the stronger mono red decks, and I wouldn't mind covering it again. There's also Blue-Red Wizards. I think that this might be the next spiritual successor to the mono-red Flame of Keld deck, although you probably cut the Flame of Keld in this deck to fit in blue. You put in Odalise, another wizard for Wizard's Lightning, which is always awesome. You could play probably about 12, if not 16 wizards in the blue-red list, and that'll give you plenty of wizards for a Wizard's Lightning. So that looks really good. Plus, there's a bunch of other stuff. You can play Ionize in this deck to both protect against Settle the Wreckage and pile on extra damage. There's just a lot that I like about this deck. And while we're talking about premier aggro decks in the format, there's Boros, there's a mono-red Flame of Keld list, but I think this might be on the short list of really good aggro decks in the upcoming format that a lot of people want to test. But I guess the last tribal deck that I'm going to talk about here, we could build a lot of tribal, but the last one I guess I'm excited to talk about in this video at least, is Grixis Dragons. Grixis is another deck that has really good mana, and you can make a great argument for Grixis control, because this deck makes blue mana really well. It's got blue-red duels, it's got blue-black duels, so blue isn't a problem. If you want to play Sinister Sabotage in a control deck, this is the best 3-color combination to put it in, technically. So there's that. But, if you wanted to build Grixis control, that's an idea too. But as far as Grixis Dragons go, obviously there's Nicol Bolas, the big Grixis Dragon. But there's, Demanding Dragon, Varix Bladewing, and especially the newest in the Dragon bunch, which is Niv Mizzet, out of Guilds of Ravnica. And this is actually probably the best way to actually cast Niv Mizzet. Everyone complains that he looks really hard to cast, but when you've got Sarkhan Fireblood and Dragon's Horde in your deck, it becomes considerably easier to cast, and you even get to cast it earlier than you normally would. So, not only that, but obviously Grixis has great tools for removing creatures and drawing cards and doing whatever you need to do. It's got removal, it's got card advantage. So, you could build a great shell around these dragons here, to where you have lots of removal, a little bit of card draw, Planeswalker or 2 if you're into it, and then this huge suite of flying threats. But we've arrived at green-white tokens, and you knew we would eventually. And honestly, I think this deck could be a Naya deck, where the only red card, I think, is Legion Warboss. This is just probably one of the better 3-drops in the entire format. Whether you're playing aggro, control, or mid-range, and I mean it about control. I cut a part out of one of my videos just recently where I went on a whole screed about how Legion Warboss could actually be a good threat for control decks, but I'll leave that to later. But in any case, obviously in aggro and mid-range, this card is really, really good. And it could be, even if it's your only red card, a reason to play red in the green-white tokens deck. But even if it's just green-white tokens, this is obviously sort of the March of the Multitudes and Venerated Loxodon deck. And those cards look really, really abusable. Plus, we got a lot of decent enablers. We got Amara, and we have Saproling Migration, but I'm not even sure the deck wants to play that. But we do want to play Legion's Landing, maybe Hazda Marshal even. So there's just so many good cards for this deck right now. Time will tell if the deck itself is good, but I have the idea this deck can fill the board very, very fast, just with some sort of preliminary drawing up of the deck that I've done. So I'm really interested to get in the lab with this thing and see exactly how quickly it can expand its board, because it looks like it's a snowball thing. By turn 4 or 5, you're going crazy, especially if you get a March of the Multitudes or, God forbid, 2. Things will just go out of control quickly. One of the decks I'm actually most excited about, believe it or not, it doesn't look like much, but I really want to show you guys blue-black or mid-range, which is basically a LAZAV deck, but it's actually an Atrata deck, y'all. But it's also kind of a Thief of Sanity deck. I've talked about LAZAV a lot. I love this card. I think that, a 2-drop that has relevance all game and gets better as the game goes on is a rare and special thing. And I think LAZAV might actually be a great, unbelievably great creature in the next format. She's also a value creature. She does something when she enters the battlefield, for what it's worth. But still, LAZAV looks insane to me. And combined with the Trotta, Thief of Sanity, she just looks ridiculous, you know. And I had a bunch of people ask if this actually works, and yes, it does. Anytime a creature's own name occurs in its text box, you can just replace its name with this creature. So if LAZAV isn't a Trotta and hits for combat damage, yes, it'll put a hit counter on a creature. Yes, it'll shuffle back into your deck. Unless you can sacrifice it or bounce it to your hand while the trigger's on the stack, you can do that too. So the deck has a lot of tricks. Thief of Sanity is crazy too. I just want to point that out. You can win off of a Trotta's triggers. So I like a lot about this deck. It also plays Mausoleum Secrets really, really well for what it's worth. Go search up in a Trotta or a LAZAV, whatever you need. So this deck looks awesome, has a lot of really good pieces, and I cannot wait to show it to you. Also not the most expensive deck in the world for what it's worth, and neither is GUTTERBURN, which is I guess the last budget deck I want to talk about, and the next to last deck we're covering it all today. But GUTTERBURN is exactly what it sounds like. It's a gutter snipe deck that also uses, I think it's electrostatic field, or is it electromagnetic? It's electrostatic field. Watch me get it completely wrong. Anyway, this new thing from Guilds of Ravnica here, but doubled up. You know, when they're both on the board, these cards are great together. You know, plus we have a fair amount of burn in standard to actually enable a decent budget burn deck. So I can't imagine this deck will cost more than $10 or so. And it actually looks like it can be really, really good. You know, maybe we play Flame of Keld, maybe we play a Wizard package and like Wizard's Lightning. And just really go crazy with this thing. And I really don't think it'll be that expensive. It's probably really effective for a budget deck, so I can't wait to get down and build this thing. But that's it. I think we made it to like 18 or 20 decks. So we got pretty high up there, more than the 15 I wanted to discuss. But it's a lot of decks, and I'm mostly just spitballing, letting you know what I'm working on. This is, again, you know, one of the most anticipated, most hyped standard rotations I've ever seen, and I've been in it since '95, dog. I hope that this helped you get some ideas, and again, if you wanted to see any of these decks more than others, or you're particularly hype about this list or that list, go on over to the Patreon, donate just $1 a month, $1 every 30 days. Not only will you get to vote in this poll for what decks you want to see first, but I'll be doing multiple polls in the first few weeks of the standard deck tech season. So you'll be able to vote in all of those, and I'll let you know what decks we're doing the day before we upload them. So I like to think that I provide more value for $1 on Patreon than just about anybody else on this whole website, MTG or not. So donate your $1 per 30 days, and you can vote on these decks and get some information like what we're doing before we even do it. So do all that stuff and all the other stuff as well. Like the video if you can, you know, if you got the time. Like the video. Hit the link in the description to go over to my sponsors at TCG Player. They do a lot to keep the lights on around here, and they're going to be the cheapest place you can get any of the decks that I just talked about. And when I actually do tech them in full, and I'll have links so you can go check out those lists on TCG Player. But again, they're just the cheapest place you're going to get any product, including GRN sealed product. And you still want to get a booster box, they are the cheapest place you can do it. So hit the link in the description. Helps my channel out when you do it. Share the content around so everybody gets in on the love and sees what to build this season, or at least get some ideas. It's really my only goal here, my only aim, is to get some ideas out into the ether, you know. I hope we never have to say ether again, for real. But anyway, but I'm Cha. And I think that's it. Subscribe, obviously. If you haven't done that yet, it is almost deck tech season. So, I mean, like within the next few days, we're going to be putting decks on the channel. So subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications, do all the stuff, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.